Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. Today, I'm joined by my co-founder and author, George Szamuely, and a wonderful guest in Singapore, Jim Rogers, who's an international investor and author of Street Smarts, Adventures on the Road and in the Markets. Thank you very much for joining me today, guys.
I'm delighted.
Very good to have you both. And today we're going to discuss a topic that is not regularly discussed in the mainstream media, as the focus tends to be on the spat between Washington and Beijing these days. We're going to focus on China's economic interests in the Middle East. So, to begin, I would like to ask why it is that the Middle East is now turning towards China when it had traditionally turned towards the US in terms of fostering better economic relationship and economic ties. Jim, you can go ahead on this one.
Okay, well, first of all, China is becoming more and more successful, more richer and more powerful all over the world. They're spreading their wings everywhere, just as Great Britain did once upon a time, just as the US did once upon a time. So it's natural. The Middle East has got a lot of money and a lot of people and a lot of influence. But China is doing it everywhere. Africa, South America, everywhere. It's natural that they're in the Middle East now.
And do you think one of the main drivers for this relationship is natural resources and the quest for obtaining oil, gas, natural resources from there?
Well, of course it is. I mean, and if you include Iran, Persia in the Middle East, they've certainly got a lot of oil. The Chinese are there. But many other traditional Middle Eastern countries also have a lot of oil. And China needs oil. I mean, China's a gigantic economy and a gigantic population. It's natural that they're going where the assets are.
Exactly. And George...
Could I just
okay,
go ahead, Ciara.
I was going to ask you, George, do you think there's an element, because if you think about where the interests for China are, they also get oil from Russia, they've also gotten oil from the US, and they've actually diversified a lot of their interests over the globe. Why do you think it is now that they're concentrating efforts on the Middle East and North Africa in terms of fostering better ties, importing and exporting, rather than, for example, Russia or the US? Of course, tensions are high.
Well, obviously, China is diversifying its energy demands. It's a huge expanding economy. It obviously has huge energy needs, and it makes sense to diversify. They don't want to become too dependent on Russia, and they don't really want to become too dependent on the Middle East. But it's also part of their Belt and Road Initiative, in which they exchange their purchases of energy with massive investments in infrastructure and development. So it's a good deal for China, but it's also problematic for America and Europe, because suddenly this is a traditional area of their interest, and now China has moved in a very big way.
And actually, I'm glad you mentioned this, the Belt and Road Initiative, because initially it was started in 2013 and fostered as in the spirit of the Silk Road, trying to encourage economic ties by also giving money for infrastructure development in the regions that it invests with. And this initiative, although it sounds like very impressive, it's actually quite hazy on what exactly the programs and the set way of how to conduct it is. There's not actually much said on what they plan to do. It's very good PR branding because obviously it offers very enticing deals of infrastructure, loans, investments, and trade agreements, but the actual long-term goals, it's not clear on what the objectives are.
Well, Ciara, if you ask me, they probably don't know. They're doing it by the seat of their pants. They're doing it as they go along, because who knows how it's going to wind up.
Yeah.
The British 200 years ago, 300 years ago, started sailing around the world. They didn't know how it was going to wind up, but they just did it as they went along. And that's what China's doing too, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere. And One Belt, One Road is probably, at least at the moment, the most important thing happening in the 21st century, because it's going to change everything we know. You know, when the Spanish and Portuguese started sailing around the world, it changed geography, changed the world. The railroad changed geography 200 years ago. Well, one belt, one road is going to change geography. I don't know how all the ways. Maybe Gaggle TV does, or maybe George does, but I don't. But it's certainly going to be extremely important to the world and change everything we know.
Everything we know, yeah. George, might you want to add? I wanted to turn it on its head and just look at the Middle East and their interest in China. Is the Middle East more interested in China than they are in the Middle East? Or what kind of way would you put the emphasis on the relationship?
Well, I do think that in some ways this captures the Cold War era. I mean, the Cold War era, you had the United States and then you had the Soviet Union, and that enabled many Middle Eastern countries to diversify their interests. They could play one superpower off against another. And some of that is happening today. So during unipolar moment immediately following the end of the Cold War, they really had nowhere to go but the United States. Now, with China's emergence, they have somewhere else to go. And the good thing with China, as far as they are concerned, and which was certainly also true during the Cold War, when, as far as the Soviet Union was concerned, is that China doesn't make all these demands from them that the United States does. China doesn't go in and say, well, I don't really like your policies on gays. I want you to change your policies on women, or I want you to democratize. China doesn't do any of that. So that makes China a very attractive partner to many Middle Eastern countries.
Yeah, actually,
I would just interrupt and say George is exactly right, and China is doing that in Africa as well. You know, when America or Britain goes into Africa, they tell the Africans what to do. But when China goes in, they say, here, we'll pay you. Here's top money. Now go do what you want. We'll leave you alone. You leave us alone. So it's an entirely different approach. And of course, America could do that when it had a monopoly, but now China's going in and say, okay, guys, we'll leave you alone. Do what you want, but be our friends.
Yeah, exactly. The China model, as it were, is this model of soft power where they don't require social and political change, but they offer instead good diplomatic relations and investment. Who wouldn't want to take that deal? It's
absolutely. Yeah.
We will see, Ciara. By the way, we will see, of course, in 30 years, 40 years, if tensions rise throughout the world. But at the moment, China's playing it very soft, very slow, and just saying, okay, you do what you want. We're here to help.
Yeah.
Whereas America goes in and says, you do it our way.
Yeah. And it suits the Middle East, who's afraid of losing control of populations without pressing them to, say, free their press, open up the press, or to change any kind of social policy. It gives them, obviously, the guarantee that they can continue doing business as usual and without losing control of their own population. And it gives a special promise that I think other countries haven't offered beforehand.
Yeah.
So I think we'll pause here, and you will all be very glad to hear that there's a part 2 coming shortly. Thank you, James and Jim. And I will get back to you both with part 2.
Hooray.
Good.